Elizabeth is a princess whose life gets turned upside down during a royal banquet. Out of nowhere, her fiancé, Prince Friar, publicly announces that he's breaking off their engagement because he claims Elizabeth pushed his beloved Sylvie down the stairs. The accusation completely blindsides her because she never did anything of the sort. Unfortunately, Friar is far more interested in showing off than listening to the truth. As if humiliating her in front of everyone wasn't enough, he also orders her to be locked away in the dungeon. The saddest part is that Elizabeth had spent years doing everything she could to become the perfect future queen. She even took over the prince's duties while he skipped work to attend parties. Her maid constantly begged her to rest, but Elizabeth always stayed up late finishing reports because she believed she was helping both Friar and the kingdom. She even convinced herself she worked better without him around. But Elizabeth wasn't doing it for the prince alone. She genuinely cared about the kingdom's people. Alongside handling royal affairs, she secretly ran the successful Funnel Corporation, using its profits to create jobs and help the poor. The townspeople admired the company's mysterious owner, never realizing it was Elizabeth herself. She preferred staying anonymous because helping others mattered more to her than receiving praise. The next morning, Prince Friar finally drags himself into her office with another ridiculous request. He wants the Geico Group to gain access to the royal treasury. Elizabeth immediately refuses after discovering the company had been secretly skimming profits. Giving them access to the treasury would put the kingdom's finances at serious risk. Friar throws a tantrum because he wants to impress his new friends and orders Elizabeth to approve the request, reminding her she's just his fiancée. Elizabeth refuses to back down, knowing the law is on her side and protecting the kingdom is more important than protecting his ego. After he storms off, Elizabeth asks his knight, Robert, to keep an eye on the prince before someone manipulates him into making even worse decisions. She knows that one reckless choice could drag the entire kingdom into decline, and ordinary people would suffer the consequences. Later, Elizabeth finally finishes her work and prepares to enjoy a rare day off. She asks her maid, Michelle, to ready the carriage. But before she can leave, her father arrives with urgent news. The king and the chancellor must attend an emergency meeting about increasing monster activity, leaving Elizabeth to handle the kingdom's upcoming anniversary celebration on her own. Elizabeth quickly realizes the problem. The meeting takes place during the kingdom's anniversary celebration. She suggests canceling the event, but her father explains that's impossible because guests from distant lands are already on their way. Instead, the king has decided to leave the entire celebration in Elizabeth's hands. She is completely shocked and tries to refuse, but her father tells her the king trusts no one more than her. With that kind of confidence placed on her shoulders, saying no isn't really an option. So, she quietly accepts the responsibility, even though her relaxing day off disappears before it even begins. While preparing for the anniversary celebration, Michelle spots Prince Friar openly flirting with Sylvie. She's furious that he's cheating on Elizabeth. But Elizabeth doesn't mind since it's common for princes to have multiple partners. Her only concern is that Sylvie, who was recently adopted into a noble family, still lacks proper royal etiquette and could damage the kingdom's reputation. To prevent future problems, Elizabeth invites Sylvie for tea. She politely explains that if she wants to be with the prince, she must behave responsibly because her actions affect both the prince's reputation and the kingdom's image. Elizabeth also mentions the injury on Sylvie's leg, knowing she got it while secretly meeting another nobleman. Instead of exposing her, Elizabeth simply tells Sylvie to stop cheating on the prince, since she has no interest in their messy relationship and only wants to protect the kingdom. Sylvie apologizes, but the moment she leaves, her innocent act disappears. Furious that Elizabeth uncovered her secret, she spots Prince Friar, bursts into fake tears, pretends to fall, and falsely accuses Elizabeth of attacking her. Back at the banquet, Elizabeth denies the accusation and reminds Friar that causing a scene in front of foreign guests will only disgrace the royal family. But the prince refuses to listen, declares Elizabeth guilty of trying to murder Sylvie, and orders her to be thrown into the dungeon. Neither Elizabeth nor the guards understand what is happening, but Robert, the prince's loyal knight, has no choice but to obey his master's orders. As Elizabeth is forced to the ground, she catches Sylvie wearing a smug little smile. At that moment, everything clicks. She realizes Sylvie planned this from the very beginning and successfully framed her. Almost everyone watching can tell the accusation is complete nonsense. But with the king and Elizabeth's father away, Prince Friar holds the highest authority in the castle. No one dares challenge his command, so Elizabeth quietly accepts her fate and walks to the dungeon without resisting. When news finally reaches the king, he is completely stunned. He can't believe his own son threw the kingdom's most capable woman into prison over such a ridiculous accusation. His first instinct is to rush back and set Elizabeth free while giving Friar the scolding of a lifetime. But then Elizabeth's father does something far more disappointing. Instead of standing up for his daughter, he convinces the king not to return, saying there is no need to waste time over the situation. In other words, he leaves Elizabeth to deal with the mess all by herself. Trusting his judgment, the king reluctantly agrees. A whole month passes with Elizabeth locked inside the dungeon. At first, she thinks prison might finally give her a chance to relax. Unfortunately, Prince Friar somehow finds a way to ruin even that. Despite locking her up, he continues dumping piles of government paperwork on her as if prison were just another office with worse lighting. One day, Michelle secretly sneaks into the dungeon using magic to avoid being seen. Elizabeth casually puts the guard to sleep with hypnosis, proving she could have escaped whenever she wanted. She asks Michelle whether the king or her father has finally decided to fix this misunderstanding. Instead, Michelle delivers another painful blow. Elizabeth's own father was the one who argued against helping her. Hearing that finally opens old wounds because he has always pushed difficult responsibilities onto her while avoiding them himself. As if that wasn't bad enough, Michelle reveals that Prince Friar has also started targeting Funnel Corporation. He has labeled it the company of a traitor and plans to replace all of Elizabeth's carefully chosen executives with his own clueless followers. Elizabeth immediately realizes this will destroy the company and hurt the kingdom's economy. Michelle can't understand why Elizabeth still worries about a kingdom that has treated her like a disposable tool. Elizabeth admits she's furious about being betrayed by Friar, framed by Sylvie, and abandoned by her own father. But she insists that none of it is the fault of the ordinary people, and she doesn't want innocent citizens to suffer because of their leaders' mistakes. Then Michelle shares one final piece of news. Prince Friar and his inner circle have been spreading false rumors that Elizabeth tried to assassinate Sylvie so she could seize control of the kingdom. They have absolutely no evidence, yet the public has started believing every word. The same people Elizabeth spent years helping are now insulting her without knowing the truth. That is the final straw. For the first time in her life, Elizabeth decides she's done sacrificing herself for people who never appreciated her. She slams her fist into the wall, finally letting out all the frustration she's bottled up for years. Then she thanks Michelle for helping her realize how foolish she's been. She could have escaped this prison at any moment. She simply chose not to. In this world, everyone possesses mana, but only a select few can summon powerful divine artifacts. These magical treasures can take many forms, from swords to spears. Elizabeth's divine artifact is far more impressive. It appears as 7 magical grimoires, and one of them allows her to record and recreate virtually any kind of magic. When she's finally ready to leave, Elizabeth creates an ice clone to remain in the prison so no one notices her escape right away. Then she secretly crosses the border and visits Viscount Lucas of the neighboring empire. Lucas still can't believe Prince Friar threw away someone as talented as Elizabeth. Anyone with half a brain could see she was the real reason the kingdom had prospered for years, and he often wished someone with her abilities worked for his empire instead. So when Elizabeth suddenly appears at his doorstep, Lucas can barely believe his eyes. She tells him she has had enough of being used and asks for asylum in the empire. Realizing this is an opportunity too good to refuse, Lucas gladly accepts her. He then asks what she plans to do next. Elizabeth gives him a calm smile before revealing her answer. She's going to tear down everything she spent years building for the kingdom that betrayed her. Elizabeth wasn't planning to charge straight into the kingdom with swords blazing. Her goal was much smarter than that. Since the empire and the kingdom were already destined to become enemies, she decided to work with the empire. But she had no intention of using them like disposable pawns. If they helped her destroy the kingdom, they would also benefit from everything she achieved. A fair trade for both sides. Thanks to Viscount Lucas's crest, the carriage passed through the kingdom's gates without anyone realizing Elizabeth was hiding inside. Lucas planned to take her to his territory near the kingdom's border, where he could keep an eye on her for a while. Elizabeth actually appreciated how quickly he acted. If they had waited any longer, even Lucas might not have been able to leave the kingdom safely. Curious, Lucas asked whether all of this was possible because of Elizabeth's divine artifact. She showed him her grimoire and claimed it could record every book she touched and every piece of information she saw or heard. Since she had spent years surrounded by the kingdom's political secrets, Lucas immediately wondered if she had military plans or confidential records stored inside it. Elizabeth guessed the royal castle was already in complete panic over her disappearance, so she had no problem sharing some information. After all, from her point of view, she was now a refugee. But here's the twist: there was no such thing as the Grimoire of Wisdom. Elizabeth's real divine artifact was actually the 7 grimoires. She simply revealed a tiny fraction of one of them, the Grimoire Lucifer, and both her father and the king completely bought the story. Talk about selling a lie with confidence. To thank Lucas for helping her, Elizabeth promised him a reward so enormous that the bounty for turning her in would look like pocket change. Once they reached Lucas's territory, she revealed her next move. She wanted to start a business and asked him to lend her 100 gold coins. To make him feel safe, she even drafted a magical contract. Within 1 year, she would repay double the amount. If she failed, she would willingly become his slave, giving him complete ownership over her. It sounded completely insane, but Elizabeth looked so confident that she practically acted like the mountain of gold was already sitting on his table. The building she picked for her company, however, looked like it had lost a fight with time. Even her maid, Mai, wondered if her lady had accidentally chosen an abandoned ruin instead of an office. When Elizabeth pushed the front door, it literally fell off its hinges. Well, at least the renovation had officially begun. After several days of cleaning and repairs, the building was finally ready. Elizabeth proudly named it the Trader Commercial Firm. Soon after, Mitty returned from town with a list of the empire's most influential nobles. Elizabeth realized they didn't have enough workers or equipment to mass-produce luxury cosmetics yet, so she decided to start with something everyone needed: soap. And not just any soap. This version was noticeably better than the soap already sold throughout the empire. It wasn't the final goal, but it was the perfect first step toward building a powerful company. Next, Elizabeth asked her maid to contact a few important people while she visited the Church of Libris to pray for the success of her new business. During her visit, 2 little boys burst inside, excitedly telling the priest they had earned lots of money that day before running off again. The priest explained that he also ran the orphanage next door, but keeping it open had become incredibly difficult. The children knew how hard he was struggling, so they had started pulling weeds around town and cleaning the military barracks just to help support the orphanage. The priest felt guilty for relying on them, but Elizabeth reassured him that the children were simply trying to repay his kindness. She then donated several gold coins. To her, this wasn't just charity, it was smart business. Every child would grow into a future customer someday, and supporting the people raising them was simply a long-term investment. That evening, Mitty returned with good news. She had successfully delivered free soap samples to the maids working in noble households. With sales starting the next day, Elizabeth's strategy was simple. Instead of selling to everyone, she would carefully choose her customers. The soap would cost just a little more than the competitors, making it feel like a premium product. Her real goal wasn't quick profit. It was making the Trader Commercial Firm a respected brand while quietly building relationships with the empire's most powerful families. And just like that, the first step of her revenge began. 3 months later, the plan was working perfectly. Soap sales kept climbing, and customers were now placing orders for toner, skin lotion, and shampoo as well. Even then, Elizabeth refused to flood the market. Every new customer was carefully investigated first, and if they passed her inspection, they were only allowed to buy limited quantities. Sometimes, making people wait is the fastest way to make them want your product even more. As usual, Elizabeth handed Mitty some money to donate to Father Louis and several local charities before the two of them headed out for a meal. While they ate, Elizabeth reminded Mitty to keep a close eye on their competitors and, most importantly, never let the soap formula leak. Right now, that recipe was the company's greatest weapon. Part of it was locked inside the firm's safe, while the rest was kept by Elizabeth herself. Unfortunately, someone at the next table had very sharp ears. The director had been losing customers month after month because the trader commercial firm kept stealing the spotlight. Even though Elizabeth only sold to a carefully selected group of buyers, those buyers happened to be the empire's most influential socialites. Their recommendations carried so much weight that anyone who openly attacked Trader Commercial risked making powerful nobles their enemies. A man named Grants secretly listened to their conversation before reporting everything to the director of a rival company. When Grants revealed where the soap formula was supposedly stored, the director thought he had hit the jackpot. He paid Grants for the information, told him to disappear for a while, and immediately began plotting. His plan wasn't just to copy the soap. He also wanted to claim he had obtained genuine trader's soap through secret channels and sell it for several times the original price. Talk about turning theft into a business strategy. A few days later, Elizabeth received a report from the kingdom's capital. Sylvia had officially become engaged to Prince Frey, and Elizabeth herself had been declared a traitor. She knew exactly who was behind it: her own father. Duke Leiston cared more about protecting the royal family than protecting his own daughter. As long as Elizabeth remained free, he was willing to sacrifice her reputation to preserve the crown prince's honor. The news filled Elizabeth with anger, but she refused to lose focus. Her revenge was already underway, and when the time finally came, she intended to leave the kingdom with nothing but regrets. Before she could dwell on it any longer, the office doors suddenly burst open. Art Hildegarde from the Merchants Guild's legal department marched inside with several officials. They had come to arrest Elizabeth after receiving reports that Trader Commercial was selling poisonous soap that had left customers with painful burns and sores. At the guild headquarters, Elizabeth calmly presented her records. Her documents showed that her soap contained nothing dangerous, and more importantly, the supposed victims had never even bought products from her company. When Art examined the suspicious soap, it certainly looked like Trader's soap at first glance, but the poor craftsmanship immediately gave it away. Elizabeth quickly realized what had happened. Someone had stolen part of the recipe and tried to recreate it. Luckily for her, the thieves had made one fatal mistake. The complete formula had never been stored in one place. Half of it remained locked inside the company's safe, while Elizabeth carried the other half herself. Anyone using only the stolen portion would end up creating a dangerous product instead of the real thing. It was the perfect trap for anyone foolish enough to steal it. Elizabeth then asked Art to question the victims about where they had actually purchased the fake soap. After hearing the evidence, Art realized that Trader Commercial wasn't the criminal, it was the victim. She apologized to Elizabeth and immediately went after the real culprit. Soon afterward, the rival company's director, Gazaru Jackman, was brought before the guild. Elizabeth demanded compensation for stealing her formula, damaging her company's reputation, and selling dangerous counterfeit products. Gazaru admitted everything but smugly refused to pay. According to him, the Merchants Guild had no authority to force compensation. He mocked Elizabeth, saying her only option was to ask a judge from the Church of Libris, and he doubted anyone would take the complaints of a young girl seriously. Unfortunately for Gazaru, his confidence didn't last very long. Father Louis was already standing in the room. Speaking in the name of the church, Father Louis ordered Gazaru to make amends for his crimes. Elizabeth didn't waste the opportunity. Instead of asking for a simple payment, she demanded everything Gazaru Commercial's management rights, his personal assets, and every piece of equipment, material, and staff belonging to the company. Safe to say, Gazaru's business career ended faster than he expected. One moment he was trying to steal Elizabeth's success, and the next he was handing over his entire company. That's one expensive bar of soap. Artie then walks in and apologizes to Ellie for all the trouble they caused, but Ellie quickly shuts down her guilt. She tells Artie none of it was her fault, the real villains were the Merchants Guild. Feeling relieved, Artie reveals one last secret. The man who convinced Gazaru to steal the soap formula was none other than Grant Carlton, Gazaru Commercial's bookkeeper. She suspected him all along but never had enough proof to confront him. Ellie isn't surprised. Now that Trader Commercial has taken over Gazaru's company, Grant technically works for her. She asks Artie to leave the rest to her. Moments later, Grant enters the room, already knowing he's about to be questioned. Instead of giving him a lecture, Ellie hands him a bag full of money. Grant is completely confused and says the reward is far too generous, but Ellie isn't finished yet. She also promotes him to Treyer's leadership team and promises to tell the Merchants Guild that the matter is settled because he has shown genuine remorse. Grant can hardly believe his luck and gratefully accepts. Of course, Ellie didn't do this out of pure kindness. Grant was one of the people she secretly recruited through Muriel. After investigating Gazaru's shady business, Ellie realized she needed someone on the inside to push him into stealing the soap formula and expose all of his crimes. Now that the plan has worked perfectly, Grant reminds Ellie about the promise she made before everything started. Grant takes Ellie to his home, where his wife is praying beside their sick daughter. She asks where he has been, terrified that their daughter is getting worse. Ellie introduces herself and explains that Grant only worked for her to save his little girl, so she hopes his wife can forgive him. Grant sadly explains that his daughter was hit by a carriage. They spent every coin they had on healing potions, but the doctors said nothing could save her. Ellie calmly says she can heal the girl herself. Grant is completely confused because Ellie isn't supposed to know healing magic. Thinking fast, she lies and says she's using a special magic item that boosts magical power. The truth is much bigger. Her divine artifact, the grimoire of Beelzebub, can copy powerful spells, including healing magic recorded from the kingdom's archbishop. Keeping that secret, Ellie casts Heal, and a warm green light surrounds the little girl. A few moments later, she slowly opens her eyes, as if she just woke up from a long nap. Grant and his wife are overwhelmed with gratitude after Ellie saves their daughter. Ellie tells them she only fulfilled her side of the deal and asks them to keep her healing ability a secret, claiming she can only use it on rare occasions. In reality, she's hiding the power of her divine artifact. With the Gazaru affair finally over, Treyer Commercial keeps growing. The company secures a major delivery route and gains loyal customers. Lucas is amazed that Ellie turned just 100 gold coins into a thriving business empire. Trusting her completely, he grants her permission to operate anywhere in the capital and across the empire, despite knowing the kingdom is searching for her. Ellie thanks him, tells Maria to make good use of their new travel rights, and sends Muriel to strengthen their relationship with the Church of Libras. Lunoa later arrives with documents from the capital. Ellie praises her progress, but Lunoa insists she still has much to learn. After surviving the carriage accident, Lunoa awakens a rare skill called Item Analyze, allowing her to instantly assess items. Recognizing how valuable the skill is for a merchant, Ellie keeps Lunoa as her student and begins teaching her magic. As preparations for the capital begin, Ellie uses another divine artifact, the Grimoire of Belger, which allows her to make contracts with otherworldly beings. After offering a silver coin, she summons white birds and sends them to gather her trusted allies. Over the next 6 months, Treyer Commercial expands rapidly by acquiring multiple companies. Before leaving for the capital, Ellie appoints Grant as deputy director and Stua as his assistant, confident they can manage the business in her absence. Since Noble Society's social season is approaching, Ellie tells Lunoa to study hard because she isn't ready to face high society yet. During their journey, Ellie notices the road has become rough and immediately warns everyone that poorly maintained roads usually mean bandits are nearby. Moments later, an arrow flies toward Lunoa, but Ellie quickly pulls her out of danger. She steps out alone to face the bandits. After silently freezing one attacker with ice magic, she shocks the rest by defeating 3 more with nothing but her sword. The final bandit begs for mercy, claiming poverty and heavy taxes forced him into crime. Ellie remains unmoved, saying that regardless of his reasons, he still preyed on innocent travelers. She executes him without hesitation and tells the shocked Lunoa that, to a merchant, bandits are no different from goblins or orcs, they're simply threats that must be eliminated. Ellie explains to Lunoa that bandits don't just steal money from merchants, they steal lives too. If you spare them, they'll simply attack the next innocent traveler. That's why the rule is simple. When you meet bandits, you take them down. As harsh as it sounds, it's the safest choice for everyone else. As the group continues toward the capital, Mira spots a woman asking for a ride. Ellie notices she's wearing church robes and immediately stops the carriage. The traveler gratefully introduces herself as Tita, a walking nun. She explains that walking nuns travel from village to village as part of their training, healing people for free with magic. Since many remote villages have no doctors, they're highly respected. Lunoa is amazed they never charge for their services, and after a few introductions, Tita joins the journey. Along the way, Lunoa asks how Ellie knew bandits would appear. Ellie explains that the rough, poorly maintained road was the giveaway. Good rulers invest in roads because better roads mean smoother trade, more merchants, higher tax income, and a stronger economy. When roads fall apart, it's usually because the local lord is neglecting his duties. Ellie then quizzes Lunoa on what happens when roads are neglected. Lunoa correctly says trade slows and villages lose access to supplies. Tita adds that food and medicine also become more expensive in cities because transportation costs rise, hurting the entire economy. Ellie is surprised by Tita's knowledge and explains that poor roads also drive struggling farmers into banditry while forcing merchants to hire guards, making goods even more expensive. In the end, ordinary people suffer because of short-sighted rulers. Their discussion is interrupted when Muriel reports another bandit ambush. Ellie tells Muriel to protect Lunoa and Tita while she fights, but Tita insists on joining the battle. Assuming a nun wouldn't kill anyone, Ellie simply knocks out a bandit with one punch. However, when she turns around, she's shocked to find Tita has already crushed a bandit's head without hesitation. Tita cheerfully asks why Ellie hasn't finished hers yet and jokingly calls her the kind-hearted one. Ellie quickly denies that accusation, but Tita misunderstands anyway. She assumes Ellie was only holding back because a nun was watching and apologizes for making things awkward. Then she calmly says that leaving bandits alive only creates more victims, so she'll finish Ellie's job as well. Just as Tita raises her weapon, the unconscious bandit wakes up and desperately begs for mercy. Tita smiles and says that while the Lord is merciful and sinners can be forgiven, bandits don't count as people in her eyes. Therefore, they don't deserve that mercy. And with that, she finishes him off without blinking. Watching the entire scene unfold, Ellie quietly realizes she may need to completely rethink everything she believed about church women. Tita then proudly shows Ellie a gold tooth she pulled from one of the bandits, happily explaining they can sell it for a nice profit. Ellie sighs and tells her to wash the blood off first before Lunoa sees her and gets traumatized. Meanwhile, at the royal mansion, Prince Fred argues with his butler over his plan to hand out free meals in the slums. The butler explains that using the kingdom's treasury for charity without a long-term plan will only bankrupt the nation. He reminds Fred that Elizabeth also fed the poor, but she paid with her own money and, more importantly, created jobs so people could become self-sufficient. Realizing he has no counterargument, Fred angrily cancels the project and storms off, leaving the butler wishing Elizabeth were still around. Later, the group relaxes at an inn, where Tita is happily drinking non-stop. She reveals she already sold all the loot and even offers to split the profits with Ellie, but Ellie tells her to keep it. Tita excitedly tries to hug her, only to be pushed away because her nose is running. Watching them, Lunoa tells Maria that Ellie finally looks happy. Maria agrees, saying Ellie used to shoulder everything alone and rarely smiled, so seeing her enjoy herself with friends makes her genuinely happy. Elsewhere, Fred vents to Sylvia that dealing with stubborn nobles has worn him out, adding that being with her helps him relax. As Sylvia thanks him, a mysterious figure secretly watching from behind a pillar remarks that having all your hard work ruined by a fool must be a miserable feeling. After arriving in the capital, Ellie, Meyer, and Luno check into a luxurious inn while they look for a permanent place to live. Luno is shocked by how expensive and fancy the rooms are and suggests staying somewhere cheaper instead. However, Ellie explains that appearances matter. Since they plan to start a business in the capital, staying in a low-end inn could make people underestimate them before they even open their doors. Not long after settling in, a man named Arnold arrives. Luno has never met him before, so Meyer explains that he used to help manage Ellie's business back in the kingdom. Arnold proves why Ellie trusts him so much when he reveals that he has already prepared several properties for her to inspect, despite not even knowing exactly when she would arrive. The next morning, Arnold takes Ellie to view several locations. After choosing a mansion for her residence, he shows her a workshop that would be perfect for her business. The only problem is that it costs a little more than she planned to spend. Still, Ellie decides it is too good an opportunity to pass up and buys it on the spot. Arnold also recommends renovating the workshop, and Ellie happily leaves the entire project in his capable hands. With their future home and business property secured, Arnold promises everything will be ready within a few days, meaning the group must continue staying at the inn for now. Later, Meyer brings up the idea of hiring more staff. At first, Ellie assumes she means employees for the business, but Meyer actually wants to hire another personal maid. Once the company starts growing, it will be difficult for Muriel to stay by Ellie's side all the time. Ellie suggests recruiting through the Merchant Guild, but Meyer points out a major problem. Ellie is still secretly a refugee. Hiring the wrong person could expose that secret and cause serious trouble. To avoid that risk, Meyer recommends buying a slave, since magical seals prevent slaves from disobeying their masters. There are criminal slaves and debt slaves, but Ellie is not particularly concerned about which type she gets. She simply needs a reliable attendant. The following day, they visit a slave market, but the experience is far from pleasant. The slaves there are thin, weak, and clearly mistreated. Luno is especially disturbed by what she sees. Ellie understands her feelings and gently tells her that she does not have to become comfortable with it, but she does need to understand the reality of the world they live in. Deciding to look elsewhere, they visit another slave trader and are immediately surprised by the difference. Instead of a gloomy atmosphere, they are greeted by a cheerful young slave sweeping outside who looks happier than some office workers on a Monday morning. The boy welcomes them to the Cedric commercial firm and escorts them inside. Ellie recognizes the name immediately. Cedric is famous throughout the Empire and is known as the Educator. One of the powerful members of the Imperial Merchant Guild Council, he supplies slaves to the imperial court and has built a reputation unlike any other slave trader. When the group finally meets him, Cedric casually reveals that he already knows all about Ellie and her company. Ellie is not buying the innocent act for a second. A merchant of his status would hardly keep tabs on a small business unless he already knew who she really was. Realizing Cedric likely knows she is a refugee, Ellie decides to stay cautious around him. Even so, she explains that she is looking for a capable attendant who can handle daily tasks and travel frequently between domains. Cedric immediately claims he has the perfect candidate and sends for a girl named Misha. As he leads them through the building, Ellie notices something completely unexpected: 2 slaves sitting in a classroom and learning mathematics. When she asks about it, Cedric proudly explains that all of his slaves receive an education. Depending on their talents, they may also study martial arts, cooking, or other specialized skills. Compared to the miserable conditions at the previous market, Cedric's operation feels less like a slave trader's business and more like a strange boarding school with a very questionable admissions policy. Ellie cannot help but be impressed by how different it is from anything she has seen before. Cedric explains that most slave dealers cut corners to maximize profits. They spend as little as possible on food, training, and care, which is why their slaves are often weak and unhealthy. Cedric, however, follows a completely different philosophy. He invests in every slave, making sure they are well fed, educated, and properly trained. Naturally, that means his slaves cost more, but Ellie believes the higher price is more than justified. Soon, they are introduced to Misha. Cedric mentions that this is her first time meeting potential buyers, so she is understandably nervous. He also explains that her race is naturally athletic, making her perfect for frequent travel, although she is not exactly bodyguard material. Ellie is satisfied with what she sees and decides to hire Misha immediately. To complete the contract, she places her hand on the slave crest, while Cedric casts the spell that officially transfers Misha's ownership. Before sending her off, Cedric tells Misha to serve Ellie faithfully. Misha gratefully thanks him for everything he has done for her, and Cedric wishes her the best of luck as she begins her new life. The following day, Misha officially starts working as Ellie's personal attendant. One of her first responsibilities is organizing Ellie's packed schedule. She carefully lists everything on the agenda, including inspecting the workshop renovations in the morning, followed by 2 business meetings and a sales negotiation in the afternoon. Ellie appreciates her hard work but gently points out one small mistake. Next time, she should also mention who the meetings are with. Otherwise, Ellie might walk into the wrong room and accidentally negotiate with the wallpaper. Misha quickly apologizes, but Ellie simply smiles and reminds her that everyone makes mistakes when learning a new job. Right now, Ellie's biggest priority is introducing her newest cosmetic product, lip gloss, to the capital's nobles. Later that day, she attends a party hosted by Baroness Melanie. The moment Melanie spots Ellie, she excitedly calls over all of her noble friends and proudly introduces Ellie as the genius behind the cosmetics she has been using. The ladies instantly become interested because they have already seen the impressive results for themselves. Naturally, they all want to know where they can buy the products. Ellie explains that she will soon open a store in the capital, but access will be limited to members because her production is supposedly limited. To thank Melanie for introducing everyone, Ellie promises that all of her friends will receive priority memberships when the store opens. The noble ladies are thrilled. In reality, Ellie is creating artificial scarcity. Even though she can produce plenty of cosmetics, she pretends supplies are limited, turning her makeup into an exclusive status symbol. Since Melanie secured everyone early access, the nobles now owe her a favor, strengthening Ellie's relationship with one of the capital's most influential women. Ellie then unveils her new lip gloss, and Melanie instantly loves it. The other noble ladies want one as well, but Ellie tells them they can buy it after her store officially opens, guaranteeing a crowd of eager customers on opening day. After the party, Ellie and Meyer hear a commotion from a nearby alley. They discover Tita surrounded by angry gamblers accusing her of cheating them out of their money. Tita refuses to pay them back, claiming they have no proof. When the men attack, she defeats most of them herself, while Ellie knocks out the last one with a single ice bullet. As Ellie checks if she's alright, Tita accidentally admits she really was cheating. Ellie starts scolding her for gambling after promising to stay out of trouble, but Tita quickly makes up an excuse and runs away before the lecture can continue. Meanwhile, back in the kingdom, things are falling apart behind the scenes. Ellie's father summons Rosaria because the government's internal affairs have become a complete mess ever since Elizabeth disappeared. Rosaria is not surprised. Elizabeth had been quietly keeping everything running, and without her, the cracks are impossible to ignore. The prince is far too incompetent to handle the job, while Ellie's father is already overwhelmed dealing with foreign affairs. Left with no better option, he asks Rosaria to take over Elizabeth's former responsibilities. Rosaria immediately realizes he is essentially asking her to become the next Elizabeth. She has little choice but to accept because refusing would almost certainly earn her the label of traitor. Back in the Empire, Ellie enjoys a relaxed coffee with Lucas. He tells her that the Emperor recently summoned him for a personal report. Although Lucas had already informed the Emperor about Ellie before, the Emperor wanted to hear everything directly from him. Curious, Ellie asks what the Emperor thinks of her. Lucas explains that, for now, the Emperor has ordered him to simply keep watching her. Since every business venture Ellie has started has benefited the Empire, the Emperor has no reason to interfere yet. However, he still does not fully trust her. Ellie is relieved to hear that because the last thing she needs is the Emperor barging into her business plans. With that obstacle temporarily out of the way, she confidently promises Lucas that he will have a front row seat when the kingdom finally suffers the consequences of driving her away. While the kingdom is falling apart, Frey and Sylvie are too busy flirting to notice. The king can't help wondering how everything went so wrong. His advisor reminds him that once Elizabeth left the capital, there were no other candidates for crown princess, so Sylvie became Frey's only option. The king understands the logic, but he hates the outcome. He can tell Sylvie isn't fit to be queen. He would have preferred Rosaria instead since she proved she could keep the kingdom running after Elizabeth's departure. Unfortunately, Rosaria is already engaged, so that idea is off the table. Later, Frey trains with the royal knights. After beating a few of them, he smugly lectures them about how weak they are and tells them to train harder if they ever want to reach his level. The knights politely apologize, but the moment he leaves, they all breathe a sigh of relief. They secretly think Frey is a complete joke. Every duel is staged because nobody wants to embarrass him. The last knight who actually beat Frey was shipped off to a remote outpost as punishment. According to them, Frey has natural talent, but his swordsmanship is terrible because he never puts in any real effort. Unfortunately for them, Frey overhears every word. Furious and humiliated, he storms back to the castle looking for comfort from Sylvie. As soon as he arrives, he finds Sylvie crying while two royal tutors desperately beg her to attend her lessons. Frey immediately demands an explanation. Sylvie plays the victim and claims they're forcing her to do things she doesn't want to do. The tutors explain that, as the new crown princess, she must learn proper etiquette and royal duties. The only problem is that Sylvie refuses to study. Instead of encouraging her, Frey tells the tutors to leave her alone because she shouldn't have to do anything she doesn't want to do. A little later, the couple meets Chris, a merchant who brings expensive jewelry and fashionable items from the East. While admiring the gifts, Frey complains that people no longer respect him. Chris isn't exactly an expert on royal politics, but she suggests that if he wants respect, he should accomplish something impressive. In other words, prove he deserves it. Frey loves the idea and immediately thinks about earning military glory. The only issue is that the kingdom recently signed a peace treaty with the Empire, so there isn't a war to fight. While Frey is trying to think of another way to become famous, someone knocks on the door. He tells them to come back later because he's busy, but Rosaria walks in anyway, fully aware that the prince isn't doing anything useful. She can't believe he has time to shop for gifts with a merchant while everyone else is cleaning up the mess he created. Frey gets offended and reminds her that he's the crown prince. Rosaria isn't impressed. She bluntly says the only reason he has any value is because he happened to be born into the royal family. She then looks at Sylvie and admits she's surprised someone as capable as Elizabeth lost to someone as average as her. Still, Rosaria makes one thing very clear: what happened to Elizabeth will never happen to her. Her family controls the kingdom's largest military force, and unlike Elizabeth's family, her father actually protects her. Framing her with fake crimes simply isn't an option. Rosaria drops a stack of documents onto the table. Frey stares at them, completely confused. She explains they're simple government papers that even someone as hopeless as him should be able to handle. All he has to do is sign them and hand them back. Frey is insulted, but curiosity gets the better of him. One document authorizes aid for one of the kingdom's vassal states. Instead of helping, Frey gets annoyed because he doesn't think those smaller nations deserve support. Then a terrible idea pops into his head. Rather than helping the vassal states, he'll use them to earn himself military glory. Meanwhile, over in the Empire, Elizabeth is focused on something far more productive: building her business empire. Using a detailed map from Lucas, she finds the perfect location for her future port and manufacturing hub. She then asks Misha about the day's schedule. Misha reminds her about an afternoon meeting with the Byrne Commercial Company and a dinner with Viscount Napa later that evening. Misha is confused because the Byrne Company is one of their biggest competitors in the lipstick business. Elizabeth isn't worried at all. She believes they're probably coming to negotiate a partnership after losing so many customers. If they actually try to fight her instead, she'll simply crush the competition completely. As for Viscount Napa, Elizabeth expects he'll also propose a partnership. Although it's tempting, she plans to decline for now because her company's priority is strengthening its position in the capital before expanding elsewhere. Still, she wants to stay on good terms with him, so she even invites Lenoa to join the dinner as practice for dealing with nobles. Their plans are suddenly interrupted when Arnold rushes in with alarming news. The kingdom of Serres, one of Horia's vassal states, has declared war on the Empire. Elizabeth is stunned because Serres is a poor country that survives mostly through tourism. Starting a war is probably the fastest way to scare away tourists. Arnold adds that the invasion has already begun. Normally, Elizabeth wouldn't be too concerned since Serres isn't strong enough to seriously threaten the Empire. The real problem is that their army is marching straight toward the village where she planned to build her new manufacturing port. Elizabeth quickly asks whether there's a fortress in Brachin Valley nearby. Arnold confirms there is, with around 500 soldiers defending it. The bad news is that Serres has roughly 1,500 troops, leaving the defenders badly outnumbered. They can probably hold the fortress for a few days, but only if reinforcements arrive in time. Just then, Lucas sends another report explaining why Sarah's suddenly declared war. According to their king, they want to reclaim land that was supposedly stolen from them years ago. Arnold remembers the Empire did take that territory around 20 years earlier, but as he points out, it wasn't stolen at all. Arnold explains that the Empire never stole the disputed land in the first place. 20 years ago, the area was constantly attacked by monsters, and since the Kingdom of Ceres couldn't protect its own people, the Empire stepped in and kept the land safe. After governing it for so long, it legally became part of the Empire. So, Ceres suddenly claiming it was stolen makes very little sense. Lucas also sends word that he's marching toward the fortress with 20 soldiers, but it'll take several days before he arrives. With nothing else she can do for the moment, Elizabeth decides to wait and see how the situation unfolds. That plan falls apart the very next day. Against all expectations, the Ceres army captures the fortress with the help of a mysterious elite force they apparently hired. The sudden defeat forces Lucas to change his route, and now Elizabeth is genuinely worried. Technically, Ceres has already reclaimed the land they claimed was theirs, so the war should be over. But if they use this victory as an excuse to push deeper into Imperial territory, her future business projects will be in serious danger. Left with no better option, Elizabeth decides to head to the battlefield herself. Myra quickly objects, reminding Elizabeth that showing up in person could reveal her location to the kingdom. Elizabeth knows the risk, but right now she doesn't have much of a choice. What bothers her most is that the King of Ceres has always been known as a peaceful ruler. Starting a pointless war doesn't sound like him at all, which makes the whole situation even more suspicious. The next day, Elizabeth recruits some of the strongest adventurers in the capital to join her mission. As they're preparing to leave, Elna notices everyone is only carrying 2 days' worth of supplies and wonders if that's enough. Since Elizabeth will be fighting alongside them, she decides it's time to share one of her biggest secrets. She opens her grimoire and casually pulls an entire barrel of water out of her pocket dimension. Then she explains that her magical storage contains enough food and supplies to support an army of 100 soldiers for several months. The supplies they're carrying are simply a backup in case they get separated during battle. The adventurers are stunned by what they've just witnessed, but wisely decide not to ask too many questions. After a long journey, the group finally reaches the area near Brochin Fortress. While the others set up camp, Elizabeth builds a defensive wall around their position. Just as everything seems under control, their scout, Marty, rushes back with horrifying news. She discovered a nearby village that has been completely occupied by armed soldiers. Elizabeth asks for details, and Marty grimly explains that most of the villagers have already been killed, while the few survivors are being dragged away by enemy troops. Elizabeth is horrified. Attacking innocent civilians is a war crime, and she refuses to believe the entire Ceres army would intentionally slaughter villagers. Her first thought is that a small group of rogue soldiers must have acted on their own, especially since there appear to be only 10 enemy troops in the village. Whatever the reason, Elizabeth isn't about to stand by and watch. She immediately rallies her team and orders everyone to move out. They're going to rescue the remaining villagers before it's too late. Elizabeth's plan was simple: help the villagers while gathering information about the invading army. To do that, she decided Elsa's group would enter the village while everyone else stayed behind to finish setting up camp. After nightfall, Elizabeth and Elsa quietly slipped into the village and captured a lone soldier. With a knife pressed against his throat, Elizabeth demanded answers. The terrified man revealed that they were soldiers from Horia who had accepted the Crown Prince's offer of money to fight. He also claimed Prince Fried had just happened to be near the border for military exercises when the war began. Elizabeth wasn't buying it for a second, especially since Fried was famous for avoiding military drills whenever possible. She quickly figured out what was really going on. The kingdom of Ceres depended heavily on Horia for its salt supply, and managing that aid was one of Fried's responsibilities. Back when Elizabeth worked beside him, she prepared all the documents while Fried simply signed them. Now that he controlled the aid himself, he could cut off the salt supply and force Ceres to obey him. It was all part of his desperate plan to rebuild his ruined reputation through war after Elizabeth stopped covering for his failures. Talk about destroying your own kingdom just to save your ego. Elizabeth then asked what had happened to the villagers. The soldier admitted that all the men had been killed, while the women and children were locked inside their homes. Hearing that made Elizabeth furious. Attacking innocent civilians crossed a line that could no longer be ignored. The Empire would never settle this peacefully now, and Fried's reckless actions could easily spark a full-scale war. Before dying, the soldier also revealed that 4 guards were still stationed in the village, while 2 soldiers and their commander were occupying the village chief's house. The soldier suddenly begged to join Elizabeth's side, claiming he wanted to make up for his crimes and fight alongside them. It sounded like the classic redemption arc, except Elizabeth wasn't interested. Without hesitation, she slit his throat, telling him the only way he could atone was by dying slowly for everything he had done. Cold? Absolutely. But in her eyes, mercy was no longer an option. After that, Elizabeth and Elsa stormed into a house where soldiers were harassing a young woman and her grandfather. Elizabeth cut them down without hesitation and captured one alive for questioning. She asked about the forces defending Brone Fortress, promising to spare him if he cooperated. The frightened soldier revealed that Sergeist's regular troops guarded the south, while a group of mysterious elite mercenaries held the north. He didn't know who they were, only that they gave everyone the creeps. Once Elizabeth had all the information she needed, she tossed the soldier outside and left him to the village women. She had technically kept her promise, but the furious villagers made sure he paid for every innocent life he had taken. 2 days later, Julius informed Elizabeth that they had finally made contact with Lucas's army. He introduced her to Yo, who thanked her on Lucas's behalf. Lucas's forces had established a temporary camp south of the fortress and were advancing while wiping out enemy troops along the way. Julius also mentioned that Fried was personally involved in the invasion. Although diplomatic protests had already been sent to the Kingdom of Horia, Elizabeth doubted they would achieve anything without solid proof that Fried had ordered the attacks. Horia would simply deny everything. Lucas's next objective was to march east, liberate every occupied village along the way, and eventually retake Brone Fortress. Elizabeth immediately volunteered to join the campaign. When she finally met Lucas, he asked about the village she had investigated. She explained that although nearly all of their supplies had been stolen, none of their own people had been harmed. Supplies could always be replaced, but lost lives never could. Still, Elizabeth had every intention of making someone pay back every single item that had been taken. The terrifying smile on her face was enough to make even Lucas feel nervous. During the war meeting, Captain Dreg explained that launching a direct assault on the fortress would be almost impossible. Their best chance was to send in the wielders of divine artifacts to infiltrate the fortress and eliminate the enemy from within. Only Elizabeth, Elsa, Lucas, and Dreg possessed such powerful artifacts. Elizabeth proposed splitting into 2 teams. Lucas and Dreg would attack the south, where ordinary Sergeist soldiers were stationed, while she and Elsa would handle the north, where the mysterious elite mercenaries were waiting. However, there was one major problem. Crown Prince Fried had personally taken command of the army, and both he and Robert of the Royal Guard could use divine artifacts. Even so, Elizabeth wasn't worried. She knew Fried was a coward who would never risk his own life once the battle started turning against him. What concerned her more were the unknown mercenaries guarding the northern side. She suspected some of them also possessed divine artifacts, making them far more dangerous. Since Elizabeth specialized in powerful wide-area magic and Elsa was an elite-class adventurer, they were the perfect team to deal with that threat. As soon as night fell, the 2 quietly infiltrated Brone Fortress. Once inside, Elizabeth gave Elsa a simple order: they were free to eliminate every enemy they came across. Take no prisoners, but avoid hurting innocent civilians whenever possible. She suspected that some of the villagers had been taken hostage, so they had to be careful. The moment they entered the fortress, Elizabeth wasted no time, instantly beheading 2 guards before they even realized what was happening. When she spotted the captured villagers, Elizabeth realized she couldn't just level the entire area with one massive spell. So instead, she switched to precision mode, raining down icy projectiles and freezing bullets that struck only the enemy. The mercenaries quickly formed a defensive shield wall, showing they were disciplined and well-trained. They clearly weren't planning to hand over the fortress without a fight. Seeing that, Elizabeth decided she'd had enough. She cast a powerful blizzard that froze the entire battlefield, and in the next moment, The frozen mercenaries shattered into pieces. Safe to say, they weren't getting back up. Meanwhile, Elsa was having her own problems. One mercenary wasn't much of a challenge, but fighting dozens at once was a different story. She also noticed their commander was protecting a door behind him, making it obvious something important was hidden there. Surrounded on all sides, Elsa activated her divine artifact, dramatically boosting her strength while constantly healing her injuries. She charged through the enemies like a one-woman wrecking crew. But just as they started closing in again, Elizabeth arrived and blasted the mercenaries away, giving Elsa the opening she needed. Realizing the battle was slipping away, the mercenary commander ordered a retreat. Elizabeth immediately moved to stop him, but something caught her attention during their brief clash. When he attacked, she blocked with her armor instead of crossing blades directly. That confirmed her suspicion. He was wielding the legendary flugel sword, a weapon capable of slicing through mithril with ease. The downside? It was incredibly fragile, which explained why he avoided prolonged sword fights. Curious about who could recognize such a rare weapon, the commander asked Elizabeth who she really was. Without missing a beat, she casually replied, "Just an ordinary merchant." Yeah, the kind of merchant who freezes armies. Before Elizabeth could finish the fight, a whistle echoed across the battlefield. The commander threw a flare that blinded everyone for a moment, then regrouped with his men. Standing among them was Crown Prince Grint of the Kingdom of Saris. Using a magic scroll, they escaped before Elizabeth could catch them. Even though the prince got away, Elizabeth's group successfully reclaimed Brone Fortress and drove the invading army out. With the battle over, a new problem appeared. Under imperial law, every citizen of the empire was considered the emperor's property. That meant harming even a single villager was treated as an attack against the emperor himself. Lucas suggested the reasonable solution would be to demand an apology and compensation through diplomacy. Unfortunately, the empire had no diplomatic relations with the Kingdom of Saris. Ideally, Horia would also be held responsible, but Elizabeth knew Chancellor Duke Leiston would simply hide the evidence and deny the kingdom had anything to do with the invasion. With no peaceful option left, Lucas decided the empire would invade the Kingdom of Saris instead. Just as they were preparing for war, Yu rushed in with unexpected news. The Saris army had raised white flags they were surrendering. Even more surprising, Robert was among those who wished to surrender. Hearing his name immediately caught Elizabeth's attention, and she decided she wanted to meet him personally. As Elizabeth met with Robert, he finally understood why they had never stood a chance. She asked what had really happened, and Robert admitted that Prince Fried had started the war with Saris purely to gain military glory. To provoke the empire even further, he ordered his troops to loot innocent villages. But Robert, a knight who had sworn to protect his people, could no longer follow such disgraceful orders. Lucas explained that although they were preparing to invade Saris, they had no intention of harming innocent civilians. Relieved to hear that, Robert decided to switch sides and help them stop Fried's reckless actions. Meanwhile, back at Sargus Castle, Fried mocked Grint for losing a fortress to what he called a backwater baron. Overflowing with confidence, he bragged that his own soldiers would crush the imperial forces in no time. However, his arrogance took a hit when a messenger reported that Robert's army had gone silent on the way to the fortress. Assuming Robert had either been defeated or surrendered, Fried didn't waste a second. Like a true master of running from his own mess, he announced he was heading back to the kingdom, planning to blame Saris for starting the war. When Grint reminded him that he had caused the entire disaster, Fried simply threatened him into silence. With Robert's inside information, Lucas and Elizabeth's volunteer army swept through Sargus with barely any losses and soon reached the capital. Robert struggled with the guilt of betraying the lord he had once sworn to serve, but Elizabeth reassured him that true loyalty meant standing against someone who was clearly in the wrong. Her words lifted the weight from his shoulders, and Robert vowed to stop Fried, even if history remembered him as a traitor. Lucas also promised to negotiate with Horia so Robert could safely return once everything was over. After the meeting, Robert apologized to Elizabeth for the way he had treated her a year earlier. He admitted that he blindly believed every lie Fried and Sylvia told about her without ever seeking the truth, and because of that, she had been exiled from her homeland. Elizabeth smiled and told him to leave the past behind. She admitted she had made mistakes too, but now she was happy living as a merchant in the Empire. From now on, she wanted him to simply call her Ellie. Back in Sargas, the king learned that Freed had abandoned them and fled to Horia days earlier. Realizing the kingdom was doomed, he decided to surrender unconditionally to the Empire and confess everything that had happened. He accepted full responsibility for starting the war and even had a plan to answer for the massacre of innocent villagers. After ordering his people to prepare for the transfer of power, he reflected on his failures as a ruler. Believing he had brought nothing but suffering to his kingdom, he apologized to his son for leaving him such a heavy burden and took his own life. Heartbroken, Grint became the new king and raised the white flag to begin peace negotiations. During the negotiations, Grint formally surrendered the kingdom and, as proof of his father's responsibility, presented the late king's head before Lucas and Elizabeth. He even offered his own life if it would spare his people. Lucas refused, making it clear that the Empire had no interest in punishing innocent civilians. Elizabeth then pointed out that exposing Freed's role in the war was far more important. Grint revealed that the written orders from Freed were still stored in the castle and agreed to hand them over. But before they could secure the evidence, a massive explosion rocked the castle. Hooded mercenaries had set the building on fire, hoping to erase every document linking Freed to the war crimes. By the time Elizabeth and Lucas arrived, the flames had already consumed everything. Questioning Grint about the mysterious mercenaries, Elizabeth quickly realized the fire was no accident. Someone had deliberately burned specific records, and she was convinced those missing documents were the proof that Haldoria, under Freed's orders, had violated international law. After inspecting the burned castle, Elizabeth sensed a faint trace of mana that felt eerily similar to the magic used by the mercenaries they had fought before. Hearing this, Grint immediately ordered his aide to arrest every mercenary involved. Lucas wondered if they were secretly working for Haldoria, but Elizabeth wasn't convinced. As far as she knew, no such mercenary group existed there. Since her mission leading the volunteer army was finally over, she told Lucas she would return to the Empire ahead of him. Lucas wasn't worried in the slightest after all. This was Elizabeth. She, however, groaned about having to pass through the battlefield again, revealing a surprisingly relatable side of herself that even Lucas had never seen. Meanwhile, Elsa and the others had finished cleaning up after the battle and were ready to leave. When Elsa asked where Elizabeth was, Mitty explained that she was traveling with the surrendered Haldorian soldiers. Elsa immediately thought it sounded dangerous, but Mitty wisely told her not to dig any deeper. On the journey back, Elizabeth told Robert they would avoid the main road. The villages along the usual route had been devastated by the war, and if the former Haldorian soldiers passed through them, angry survivors would likely tear them apart before they could explain themselves. Elizabeth assured everyone that she would keep them safe. After traveling through the mountains, the exhausted soldiers stopped to camp for the night. Robert once again thanked Elizabeth for giving him another chance and swore on his honor as a knight that he would repay her kindness. Then came the plot twist no one saw coming. Elizabeth calmly told Robert that she had never forgiven him. In fact, she hated him so deeply that she had wanted to kill him all along. The past couldn't be erased, and nothing he did would ever make up for what had happened. She then revealed that everyone had been wrong about her divine artifact. It wasn't just the famous grimoire of wisdom, it was actually 7 different grimoires, each with terrifying powers. Using the grimoire of Beelzebub, Elizabeth trapped every soldier inside massive stone walls. Then she summoned the grimoire of Belphegor, casting a horrifying spell that unleashed a monstrous ooze from the netherworld. One by one, the trapped soldiers were slowly melted alive, while Robert could do nothing but watch in horror. Desperate, Robert demanded to know why she would slaughter innocent men. Elizabeth's answer was chilling. They died simply because they chose to stand beside him. If they hadn't followed Robert, they would still be alive. To her, they were nothing more than victims of his fake sense of justice and self-righteous knighthood. She continued tearing Robert apart with her words, saying he had failed in every way possible. He couldn't stop his master's cruelty, abandoned his kingdom in the end, and still dared to call himself a knight. Her relentless insults shattered his spirit. She called him a traitor who couldn't even protect his own soldiers and declared that he was nothing but scum. Finally snapping, Robert activated his divine artifact, the Knight's Crest, and charged at her in rage. Elizabeth didn't even flinch. She effortlessly cut through his sword and mocked him, saying the knight's crest was far too noble a name for a fake knight like him. As Robert stood frozen in fear, Elizabeth summoned another grimoire, Asmodeus. This one possessed the terrifying ability to rewrite memories and plant irresistible hypnotic suggestions. Rather than simply killing Robert, she planned to turn him into the very first piece of her long-awaited revenge. Subscribe to not miss the next part and watch the next video on screen.
I heard that you addicted to them